So, guys, a draft order hasn't been determined yet, but we have a Superflex Dynasty startup coming up next week. So, it's a 12-team Superflex PPR 1.75 tight end premium start 11.
Nice.
Scott, what kind of prep do you do before a startup draft? The draft order hasn't been determined yet. Talk to me about what your process is.
So we already know the format, 12 teams, start 11, 1.75 premium. So in my head, if you listen to the show, if you've played in a lot of leagues, you kind of already know like generally what that's going to look like. But then you got to start digging into the final print of what the bylaws say and the fine print of exactly what the rules are going to be going forward. So knowing how many total roster spots, is it 28, 32, 36, 25, whatever the number is. Understand how many there are in the off season, in the season, how waivers work. What are the rules with when the waivers are run? Are they run weekly? Like all those things do matter just a little bit in terms of how you're going to build your team. And then you also have to know the rules. You have to kind of know sort of trade deadline, know all the stuff about how many teams make the playoffs. Like just know all those things in the background because sometimes it's the smallest edges that end up being the difference. For instance, like a league without a trade deadline or with a trade deadline, you may play it a little riskier if you don't have the trade deadline because you have more opportunities to bail yourself out, which is the opposite if you have a week 10 trade deadline. Okay, maybe you got to be a little bit tighter in terms of how you're building your team. And then when you're doing the startup, we're obviously doing this one middle of the summer. So everything's already happened. Free agency, draft has already happened. Things are going to be a little more efficient now than they would be 5 months ago. If people have listened to the startup series I did back in January, that was based on doing a startup in January or February. You can take advantage of the fact that most of the people are going to be a lot more sure about what's going to happen then than they probably should be. But now if you do a startup a month before the season, a lot of the stuff that you're going to bank on maybe being variance that could go your way at a cheaper price may not because it's more efficient. People have more information closer to the season. So I think just understanding all of that and then deciding how do I want to build my team. Obviously, I don't know my draft slot yet. Probably in this format, I'm going to be taking the same traditional approach of trying to trade up, get the quarterback. But if I can't, a growing sentiment from people is it's a lot harder to do that now than it was last year. That definitely 2 years ago. So what do you do? We've gotten some questions recently. What do you do if you can't trade up and get the quarterback? How do you build? Do you just take the one elite quarterback and build around that? Do you trade back and just punt quarterback entirely? Like, what do you do to get an edge when it's a really tight room? And I would assume if we started a league with a bunch of listeners, it would be a tight room. No one is going to hand
for sure
us the second elite quarterback. Even if we're willing to pay, they're going to be like, man, I'll let Scott get the second elite quarterback, but he's not going to stay within his rules. He's going to pay an extra first. He's going to give him an extra pick. So what do you do like that? And that's something I really have to challenge myself on. I actually haven't done a startup in the last couple months to where I have to face that. So I think it's something interesting to think about that you may not be able to get your optimal strategy. How do you start reading the room and getting ahead of everybody? But you got to know all the details of the league first. Got to dive into the scoring. I would recommend running the scoring matrix that we have posted on the DNC Patreon. So if you don't have access to that, we can probably post it on the YouTube feed too. It's fine if anybody looks at it. You can essentially just copy it. But it kind of gives you an idea of like how the scoring affects positional value as well. So I think knowing all those things, then you just go into the room and you start wheeling and dealing.
Shane, what kind of prep do you do before your startups?
I'm
Tons, right?
Yeah,
you're like studying
ADP. I'm looking up the drafters in my league, what they've done in their previous drafts. No, none of that. Literally none of that. I will say this: I will read the format and the rules because if there's a trade deadline, the very first thing I'll do is message the commissioner and say, "Are we children?" Because I'm not playing in this stupid league with a trade deadline. You incompetent. So I might be leaving the league apparently, but I'll check that first. Scott was talking a lot, so there was one thing that he did bring up that I've been thinking about a lot is the whole quarterback thing. I'm done. That period, I am already calling it dead, where you have to trade up for two elite quarterbacks. We ushered in the era, and I'm ending it. It's over. You don't have to do it anymore, which means people are going to continue to do it for 3 years, and then I'm just going to reap the benefits of them doing it. So I appreciate everyone that's going to continue to follow that process that I and Scott started, me and him, no one else, literally no one else. And it spread like a disease throughout fantasy football. And now everyone's caught up to it. And now I'm going to go, you know what? The quarterback depth is now in a place where I am willing to risk Anthony Richardson at 111. I am willing to risk Bryce Young at 112. Is that how that works? Yeah. I'm willing to take CJ Stroud at 201. I'm willing to take Ja'Marr Chase at 110 and then back at what?
Ja'Marr Chase.
What did I call him?
I mean, no, you said Ja'Marr Chase.
That's his name, Ja'Marr.
Continue on your point and talk about how you're willing to bet on Kyler Murray relative to the price against those other guys. Because you were on a roll, but then you stated a player that doesn't exist.
Yeah, I couldn't help myself.
And then Clay laughs.
Well, so Kyler Murray's a good example of it too, right? So I take Kyler Murray at 203 because everyone's frightened of him. Oh my God, he's going to be terrible. I'm like, all right, well, he's going to be bad for half a year. So I might be in a position where, no, I don't think I'm going to compete year one, or I don't think I'm going to win year one, but it could break my way. Where if I get if I get Kyler Murray and I won't say Dak Prescott because I'm not doing that, but say I go Kyler Murray and Will Levis. Yeah, and I know that feels ugly to people.
Oh, gross.
I'm going to be really solid at the wide receiver position. And if I need to, I can trade from the excess of my wide receiver position later. I don't want to go too far down the quarterback hole, right? Like I don't want to be my first quarterback being Daniel Jones. Like literally, I'm not going any further than Kyler Murray. And if I'm being honest with myself, as they teach at AA, I'm probably not going to go to Kyler Murray as my first quarterback. I'm probably going to say, all right, we're at the CJ Stroud level. I'm grabbing CJ Stroud now because I think.
Sorry, but let's pause. This was like the prep segment. Now we're getting into some shit. All right.
Well, because anyone that's played, leave this in. If you've played Dynasty fantasy football for any period of time and you need to prep, you're a idiot. I don't know what to tell you. All it takes is you read the rules. You should know the rules. You should know the scoring settings, right? Fine. If you like to plug things into Excel spreadsheets, grab Scott's spreadsheet and look at the scoring matrix. I never understand this prep.
Okay.
Do we not know the players?
We got it, Shane. I'm just gonna feed you guys questions, okay? That will fit into the prep bucket, if you will. By the way, if you're enjoying this content, if you wouldn't mind looking down, hit that little thumbs up, give us a like. We'd appreciate that. Easiest way to help out the channel. And subscribe to Dynasty Trades in 5 if you play Dynasty football. I promise you'll enjoy this channel. Hey, you could always unsubscribe. So obviously in the Superflex draft, we're trying to get an elite QB, and like they were talking about earlier, we try to come back into the first to get a second elite QB, which is becoming tougher to do. But when you're going into a startup, let's just assume you can't get back into the first to get a second top tier QB. But let's say you get one of them. Let's say you get Joe Burrow. Okay. How are you navigating the startup? Are you thinking to yourself, like, I hope to go quarterback in the second, and then in the third, we'll see, maybe go wide receiver, punts, running back. What do you do? How do you play it in your head? Are you just totally flexible?
I think you have to kind of accept that it's going to be very hard to get the 2 elite QBs. So once you've accepted that, and you've probably exhausted every effort, and you've probably seen, and to be fair, if you consider Deshaun Watson an elite QB, if you consider Anthony Richardson an elite QB, if you still consider Kyler Murray an elite QB, and you don't feel the pressure of having to have him be an elite QB day one, I still think you can do it. You're just doing it in a different form. You're not trading the capital to do it like you would have last year, or you might have had to, or you could have done 6 months ago. So I get Shane's point to where he still wants to get an elite QB. So one of the top 8 or 9. When the good news is there's 9 of them available, at least to how Shane and I talk. So if you pick in the top 9, you're going to get one.
Yep.
You may prefer the 101 or the 103, but you may end up with the 108. You're still going to get Lamar Jackson. You're still going to get Deshaun Watson. So you're going to get one. Now it just comes down to, are you comfortable with Kyler Murray as your QB2? Are you comfortable with Tua or Daniel Jones? And you can shake your head on some and you can go, yes, I'm fine with that guy as my QB2. You have to really just decide at that point, what's my roster construction going to look like based on where I get my next QB? Because then you sit there and you start thinking, man, if I have to take Kirk Cousins in the second round, do I really want to do that? Or am I passing up a better player? Am I passing up a more elite asset that in the right circumstances, and this is kind of the out of the box thinking, let's say you end up drafting Garrett Wilson in the second round. You may go, man, that does not fit the roster construction that I want. But if Garrett Wilson goes out and has a top 8 season, he's now seen as an elite receiver that's worth 2+ firsts. Guess what? He may be a piece that at some point I could buy the next Lamar Jackson or Deshaun Watson when they're depressed. So I can still get the deal that I want. I just may have to wait a little bit, but it doesn't change my roster construction perspective. And I think that's the biggest thing. You may have to roster construct a little differently in the short term. And that's just because what you want to do is so popular. There's 8 other people in the draft trying to do the same thing, which means it's just not going to be available. So I think you either play it slow and you just kind of go best player available, best asset available, or you take the risk. I mean, Shane identified a great strategy. If you can get Kyler Murray as your QB2, all he has to do is just come back healthy. Yeah. And the community is going to view him right back in the range of Deshaun Watson and Justin Fields. Maybe he's going to be at the bottom of that tier, but you're going to go, damn, that was a really smart move compared to trading up just to draft Justin Fields. And I gave up because someone asked me the other day, man, I cannot get the 2 quarterback build right, but someone is willing to trade me the pick at it was like the 201 where Justin Fields was still there. They're willing to trade me the 201, but I have to give up my 212 and a 24 first and second.
Yeah.
And I'm like, man, I understand in a real dynasty league that already exists, if you insert Chris Olave in a first for Justin Fields, you may accept that trade in a league where you're actually making the trade where the league is already present. But in a startup, it kind of feels like, man, if Justin Fields is falling at the 201, wouldn't you rather kind of just gamble to see if someone's there at the 212, like Kyler or whatever, versus just blowing your first to make that trade up in a startup?
It's too early.
I think there's just more risk.
Early to blow a first, Yeah.
So slow play it. My question to Shane, he can answer this same one. My question to Shane, are you willing to truly zag and trade out of the top 6?
Yes.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. Speak, but I want to get your thoughts because that's the true zag is to go, hey, 9 people in this league want 2 elite quarterbacks. Nobody is caving. What if I'm the one that caves? Can I get the sweetheart deal where I get 3 pieces for 1 and build that way?
So here's what I've noticed is people are generally, you keep saying Dynasty keeps getting smarter. Maybe. But I notice people get real specific about players that they think are elite. All of a sudden, Deshaun Watson's not elite. Kyler Murray's not elite. Lamar Jackson wasn't elite until he signed his contract. What?
Right.
Okay. Justin Herbert, you can find some stink on him because he had 1 bad season. You know what I mean? Joe Burrow has a down season. Guess what? Not elite. So I'll just keep targeting guys like that are elite. They're still in the elite tier, but people are telling me aren't elite. But also, like I said, looking at the quarterback landscape, we had 3 in the top 5 picks this year. We're going to have Drake May and Caleb Williams next year. This isn't the old days of when all the quarterbacks that were good were old. It was Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, Phillip Rivers, some other old
Drew
person. Brees, Peyton Manning, all these old people that we knew the cliff was coming. It was definitely coming. If you look at the elite quarterbacks and even some of the ones that are right outside of that tier, they're largely under this age of 28. And there's some that are significantly younger than that. And all I need is half of the 5 quarterbacks that are going to be in the draft. We'll say 6 because there'll be another one that gets an early draft pick next year, early round pick. All I need is half of them, and that it's already expanded the elite quarterback tier.
I just want to add this point to what Shane said. There might be something lost in the context to what he's talking about because he references the old mentality from 4 or 5 years ago is trade back, accumulate. Even a couple of years ago, 2020, when Shane and I were saying trade up, get the 2 elite quarterbacks, other people were still saying trade back. And we were able to build some really good teams and startups because of that reason. Here's the key point. Both strategies still work, but you have to employ the rules that I always talk about. I am still going for the 2 elite quarterbacks if I can trade 3 picks for 3. Right? If I can give up my 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and you give me a top 9 pick, an 8th, and a 10th, I will do it. I don't care about the 2nd, the 3rd, and 4th. The key is I got the 3 picks. Now, a couple of years ago, what was the trade back strategy? Even Shane and I used to do the trade back strategy 5 years ago, 4 years ago. What was the key to the trade back strategy? You sell your 106 for a 2nd, and they give you a future first. or you sell your 102 and they give you their second, third, fourth, and a future first. It's these leverage trades where you're just amassing assets. I guarantee you, even the most staunch trade back people would never advocate the trade backs if they never got the additional assets.
Mm-hmm.
They're looking for the Clay. You really want to get Justin Herbert? You got to give me 4 pieces.
4 pieces.
Sure, everyone can be
sold. Right.
Everyone can be sold on deals like that. So I think it's important, if you're going to trade up, the principles of do not give up more picks than you're giving. I don't even care if you're getting an 11th and a 12th. Get the 11th and the 12th. Don't go, oh man, absolutely. It's okay. I would trade 5 pieces for Patrick Mahomes. So let me just give up my second, third, fifth, seventh, and a future first for Patrick Mahomes in the startup. Your team's going to suck coming out of the draft.
Let me ask you this. So let's say, you trade up, back up into the first, you give up your second, third, fourth, and let's say you get the 108. Would you rather have the 108, the 6 something, and then a 14? Or would you rather have the 108 and a 9th and a 10th?
I don't think it really matters. Some people will say the 6 because they're going to get a better player. I'd probably go with the 9th and the 10th because it's really what I'm going to get similar players production wise. I'm going to get the less desirable players. You're going to get the young receiver. I'm going to get the 30-year-old receiver. When we're talking that range, I probably don't care that much because I'm looking for strict production. I've already built the foundation with my 2 elite quarterbacks. So I'm really just kind of filling in the gaps. But I think that to answer your question, I don't think there's a wrong answer because you're getting 3 picks.
Yeah. I mean, I prefer the 6th because then if I want to and someone's on,
you can bump back again.
That's true.
Right. Which is very, I mean, you could do that obviously with the 11th or with the other variation of that trade that you were saying, the 8th or the 9th, but not as easily. And not like there's still people that'll throw a random first at you for like a 5th round pick. And you're like, did you look at the ADP? Because I prepped before this draft and I looked at the ADP and the 512 tells me it's Brandon Ayuk, who I like. But if you want to give me a 24 first for him, sure.
Well, and you don't know how the board's going to fall. So you might be sitting on that 601 and it's a player someone would pay a first and they'll throw back their 11th. Right. And all of a sudden you've accomplished the same thing and you've now gotten a free pick. So to that regard, I think Shane might be right. If you can just net one of those higher picks, the last pick you get can be a 15th rounder. That's just it's already just going to be a filler player. But the key is thinking about it that way. Don't look at that 6th as what player can I get, is what can I do with that 6th? Can I now turn that into a 1st and a 10th? Because now I've accomplished the same thing, but I've gotten the leverage. So
after you trade in to get your second elite QB and you're waiting, right? You've got a big, long wait. We always recommend, don't get over aggressive and jealous that you're not in the draft and try to trade back in and give up your first and all this stuff. You guys actually advocate for doubling down and trading back again when it gets back to you in the 5th round and clustering more picks in the 7th and 8th and picking up future firsts, right?
Right. Well, and because the player tier is flat between the 5th and I don't even know, like probably the 9th. You know what I mean? Like if you look at it, it's like your hit rates and et cetera are probably basically the same between the 5th and the 9th round. That doesn't mean you're a bad drafter. It doesn't mean you're a good drafter. It's just that's how it turns out because a lot of these players are similarly they're ranked similarly or they play similarly. I don't know what the word I'm trying to say is for a change. But they have the same abilities.
One of 2 rules when you get to the mid rounds: either leverage the pick and trade back, like Shane said, because he took the words out of my mouth. It's a flat tier of players. You're going to draft wide receiver 26 in there. Someone else is going to get wide receiver 36 in 2 rounds. They're in the same tier. The one may be a little more desirable than the other, but that's it. But I think the other option, if you're forced to pick, because I've heard people come to me and say, hey, I got the 2nd, 3rd, and 5th, right? And I'm sitting on my 4th rounder, which is a little bit of a higher pick, but no one will give me the leverage deal to trade back. I'm trying to get a 7th or an 8th and a future first. No one will accept it. That does happen. You're forced to pick. If I'm forced to pick, what I'm going to be looking for is either just pure value. So you know what? If they're going to leave me a 3rd quarterback, I'll take them. More importantly, though, if I have to pick, I'm trying to shoot for a positional advantage. A stud running back or an elite tight end, if they're there, I can justify, okay, now I have 2 elite quarterbacks. and I just got Mark Andrews or something like that. Even if it's only a 1.5 premium, I would be like, I would take Mark Andrews because that shifts my roster construction now. Now I'm like strong at quarterback and I have the best tight end. So I can just really just kind of go hog wild on as many shots at the other positions as possible. So just don't get stuck picking a player because you're forced to pick. Think about why I'm doing it. And I want to try to get either a really insulated asset or a positional advantage. And usually that's a tight end or a running back, not a receiver, because 24 receivers are going to be gone by then.
Exactly.
The one thing if you have to come out of startup drafts with is more draft capital. Look, that's because that's the only way to correct any errors that are unforeseen or that you may have made. There's tons of times you draft a team and it looks great. Yes. And it would have been great if we look at last year's scoring or 2 years scoring.
Right.
2 years ago? 2 years ago scoring. It would have been great, but sometimes things just happen. And then you have no draft capital. You have no way to rectify it. It's like all of a sudden this asset that you thought was maybe, I don't want to say ascending, but say a 26-year-old, 27-year-old wide receiver, right? You're like, all right, well, I'm betting on this. I don't have any draft capital to fix that. And if he suddenly has a bad season, then he's a descending asset that quickly. Like the very next season, he's a descending asset, and I can only sell him at a loss, which, is an option. It's just not a great one.
So let's say this is your first Dynasty League ever. Welcome to Dynasty. Yay, insert applause sound effect. So what are some things you can take advantage of, guys? If it's a brand new league, they're listening to us, they're getting these little tidbits. What are the main goals? Yes, go up and get to elite QBs. You might even be able to do it a lot cheaper, not giving up your second, third, and fourth. You may be able to just give up your second and fourth, for example, and get back a sixth and a seventh. So you could definitely start a little bit lighter, use a trade calculator if you want, but talk to me about other ways that people who listen to us before their first startup can take advantage of their league mates.
Well, Shane kind of already hit on this, so I'll just say this real briefly. I think he nailed the point about whether you get the two elite quarterbacks or not, but especially if you do, how great is the feeling when you have two locked in quarterbacks and then all you have to do is just build value on your team? That's it. We do a lot of roster reviews and it's like, man, I already have my two quarterbacks. So your job over the next year is build as much value as you can. And maybe this is just playing in a lot of leagues. It feels like it's easy for probably Shane and I to trade when we want because we're the aggressors. We can just send out a lot of offers. But if you have draft capital and you have assets that can be moved, you can fix your roster construction when you need it. You don't have to fix it today. But if you're the team that leaves the startup, even if you don't win in year one, and I think that's the beauty of the two elite quarterback strategy is sometimes you can get lucky and they can carry you pretty far. But even if they don't, if you go into next season and you still have two top 8 quarterbacks and you got an extra first and a couple extra seconds, guess what? All you have to do is just fill in the gaps.
Yep.
Play the market, use your assets, make trades, and you're just filling in the skill players because the skill players change from year to year, right? Running backs move around, receivers move around. Tight ends generally don't, but tight ends are so flat. It's kind of like you go get them when they're available, and other than that, you can punt. But if you have the flexibility, the worst place you can be is I have an okay team, but I don't have good quarterbacks, and I don't have a lot of draft capital. The target is on your back. Oh, sorry, man, you don't have a quarterback, and you only have the 104. Guess what? You're going to dent 30% of the progress you just built in your startup last year for you to get that Caleb Williams. Because Shane and I would do that. We could have two elite quarterbacks. If we're sitting in the position to get Anthony Richardson, guess what? I'm disrupting your roster if you want him. I'll take him, and I don't care. I'll wait till later to move him. So don't put yourself in that position. I think that's why we advocate it most, is because then it's easy to play Dynasty in a 2 or 3 year window when you have elite quarterbacks.
Nope.
Hey, Shane, I need a receiver. Hey, Shane, I need a running back. Those come available all the time. You have assets. You just go and play the market.